Welcome to another episode of the Gooner Fanzine Arsenal Women podcast. We've got a special guest today. Many of you will be familiar with her Twitter handle, her Instagram handle at Boodle Pim, and her brilliant photography, but not as many of you perhaps will be familiar with Suzy Lycett, although you are now, Suzy. You're quite a regular, a well-known figure, I think, in the North Bank. I think you get spotted quite a lot at games. People are becoming more familiar with the face behind the camera now. Thanks for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. It's funny, actually, I do sometimes forget to introduce myself with my actual name to people because I know more people will recognise Boodle Pim. So,
Can you give us the story of Boodle Pim? Because Leif was pestering me for months to say, can you find out why it's Boodle Pim and if there's any chance you could change it? And I thought, we can't change it. It's iconic at this point. And you told me when we were out for lunch in Turin, but I guess a lot of people won't know.
no, I think I genuinely get asked this more than my actual name. It confuses a lot of people. There's really no story behind it. I essentially, when I needed to create a username for my first ever Hotmail account, I think that Suzy@hotmail.com was taken, unsurprisingly. And I asked my friend sat next to me, I need a word that nobody else will have used. And he made up the word Boodle Pim on the spot. So, it's followed me across most of my social media channels since then. But sometimes I regret having left it there as the thing that now everybody recognises it. But as you said, I think it's gone a bit too far now for me to change it. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I guess like people don't shout it to you across the street yet, but maybe we're not far off that stage. It is, yeah, it's a brilliantly random tagline. But I really wanted to get you on because it's been such a busy season, and I think in January before the Palace game, me, you, and Leif all sat down for a coffee for about 10 minutes to catch up and make some plans. But it can be like that when we're going from game to game, and obviously we're in an international break at the moment, and then March is looking very hectic with his, West Ham, Liverpool, Everton away, Real Madrid home, away, and then home, which is just all very exciting. But we've got a moment to sort of sit down and reflect, because for you, this has been a season of real change, of real progress, your first time shooting for the Gooner. How do you reflect on everything so far, and how much are you looking forward to what's still in store?
Well, it's quite wild, actually. When at the beginning of the season, I wasn't too sure how often I'd get accreditation. It was never guaranteed. And when I started to get it for nigh on every game, it was brilliant. It was so much more than I anticipated. So I think that very first game was a Southampton friendly, I think was the first game that I shot, which it's, after the game, we waited for Jonas. We were essentially stood on the pitch waiting for him to come out, so you could interview him and I could take some photos. And to think from that game, how many away games, how many games abroad that I've shot on, it's quite incredible. And obviously March, with, as you say, it being so busy, it's kind of all encompassing. I work full time. I do have a day job, 9 to 5 during the week as well. So finding time to fit this in around it, this thing that I love doing, it is incredible. But over that period of time, because I've done so much, I've learned quite a lot as well about the photography piece. It had been something I'd wanted to do for so long, and being thrown into it properly into the deep end and doing so much, it's really made me progress much faster than I could have wished for, really, and hoped. So yeah, it's been pretty fun so far.
Is it the sort of thing then, after a game, you get your editing done and then actually you can switch onto your 9 to 5 job? Because I find it's something that bugs me a lot about my side of things, is that you've always got to have your phone on, you've always got to be ready for a bit of news to come in or a story to come in, and to have to phone someone. My girlfriend will moan about that all the time, but it's sort of like everyone understands that it is part of the job, that actually if you're late to this story and someone else gets it, because you weren't checking your phone, then you are going to miss out. And it's something, as a journalist, you're always switched on, looking for stories, looking for new things and new ideas. What's that like for you? Can you sort of switch off after games, after you get your work done, focus on your proper job, if you like, and then I guess you look forward to those weekends even more, like we all do?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, sometimes especially for those midweek games, I obviously have to work quite flexibly, and I'm lucky that I can do that. So I'll say we've got a Wednesday evening game, I have to be in the office in London. So I'll be there for kind of 6:30, 7, so that then I can leave early to make sure I can get to the game in plenty of time and things like that. So they sometimes do sort of slightly bleed together, but I mean, at the end of the day, I kind of have to be able to switch off to a certain extent. You know, I need to pay my bills and things like that with my day job. But it's funny. I mean, football in its own right is quite all encompassing anyway. I think not so there isn't necessarily so much necessity to always be on your phone, but you know, during the transfer window and things like that, your phone's always popping off, even just as a fan. So it's you know, it's I think with football there's always going to be an overlap between that as something you enjoy and your real life. With the photography, I guess that I'm lucky in as much as once the game's over, you know, I've shot everything I can, sent you as many photos as I can. Then it would just be the odd photo that you might need because you've done an extra interview or whatever. So I can switch off to a certain extent, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to. It's quite nice knowing that I can finish work and then in the evening, perhaps look back through some of my other photos. I might have missed editing some of them, look back through and get that second chance to do it at my leisure a bit more. So yeah, it's a bit of both, but yeah.
Yeah,
With you, I guess with journalism, you have to react, as you say, to more in the moment stories and things and keep your eye on the ball a bit more.
yeah,
So.
I think particularly in January, but even, you know, I would text you a lot in January and say, look, I've got this story, this news has come through, this is going to happen tomorrow. I need a picture, especially because we had all of these young players signing professional contracts and then going on loan, and we realized some of them who haven't played, you know, barely any first team football. And then obviously Chloe Kelly comes in. You luckily did Palace v Man City earlier this season, where she actually did get some minutes. I think it might have been her only WSL start
Yeah,
actually,
so it's
and you
quite a
were
lucky
there.
one to shot.
Yeah. So actually, you know, sometimes I think maybe people don't get that, is they presume obviously we get the match photos and what we do with it, but I keep a massive bank of photos, and my job after they come through, so that you'll make I don't know how boring this will be for the listeners, but I think it's some interesting insight in terms of you'll get to the ground, you'll get set up, you'll make a Google Drive folder, and basically you'll pop pictures in there as the warm-ups go, as the game goes. We'll put a few out on social media, but the main bed of them will be used actually not on that day, will be used throughout the season for our articles. But obviously you've also got that balance of social media and then collaborating with the Gooner on Instagram. So how do you shoot in terms of knowing where the photos are going to end up? Because obviously for me, having this massive bank of them, even last weekend when we said, look, we really need some Chloe Kelly pictures or we need some Jenna Nicewonger pictures, and obviously you're able to adapt to that. But how do you shoot in terms of having in the back of your mind, yeah, we're going to need these for articles, but actually this might get me a load of likes on social media if I look for this player, for example?
To be fair, it's there are certain players that will always get that engagement, so it's tricky to not constantly do exactly the same players. Like sometimes I'll obviously post things because I just love the shot, and you know, it might not be it's not right or wrong, but it might not be a player that will get all the engagement, but it's still a good shot. And I'll just think in my head once I've it's almost like a second adrenaline thing sometimes, where you'll see the play, you'll think, oh, that was brilliant, and then you'll look at the photo and think, yes, and I captured the moment as well. But I think that as I'm shooting a game, I'll try and get as big a variety of photos of the players as possible. Always get those photos of Renee. You know, you obviously use a lot of those. You interview her quite a lot.
Yeah.
As you say, focus on getting those photos that you need if it's a new player, for example. And then after that, it is just as I'm taking the photos, I'll bear them in mind. Normally some will stick out in terms of the action shot that I've managed to capture, or to be fair, a lot of the engagement comes from those post-game or like the pre-game warm-ups where they're just having a bit of a laugh and, you know, they're all smiling and happy. Yeah, like those ones really drive a lot of engagement. And then the post-game ones as well, when they're waving and things, all looking a bit sad and so on. Those ones always do pretty well too. It's just capturing those human moments. Those ones do the best. And if I get some of those, and those are always the ones that I prioritize editing first, so that then I can pop them out on socials, get the engagement while people are still interested in the aftermath of the game. So yeah.
What makes you different to other photographers then, in terms of if you look at everyone alongside you and their work and what they produce? Because I'm sure there is a lot of, supporting each other's work, seeing what people do, and then maybe using some of that to see how you can improve, see what you like and you don't like. How can you stand out, I guess, when there are some of these games where there are 20, 30 people all, with the flashing lenses behind the goal at the Emirates? How do you approach that thinking, you know what, I want my shots to be the best. I want people to see mine. Even if I'm not here for, for Getty or one of the big companies, you're thinking, actually, I want to do a really good job here. I guess it's not competitive, but you must also have that rapport with other photographers. There must be a bit of a photographers union.
Yeah, there actually is. It's funny you say it like that because you kind of encapsulated it there with you do have your Getty image photographers, and they've obviously got all the equipment. They've been doing it for years, and it's for many of them it is their full-time job. So they're there, and they're mainly there to get the goal celebrations. I'm not saying that they're not capturing other bits and pieces, but generally speaking, you get paid the big bucks for the goal celebrations. And it's I do, but I shouldn't compare myself to them because in terms of the equipment that I've got, it's not any. There's no comparison to make. I don't have the big zoom. I only have one main lens that I use at games because it's not always about having the most expensive equipment, as you say. It is about finding your own niche and finding how you can stand out using what you have, even if you feel quite limited sometimes based on that. It's just finding those little ways of making things a bit different. And because I'm not doing it as that full-time job, getting the goal I am getting the goal celebrations too, but it's not all about those. It's about getting those moments. It means that I might make a selection and choose photos that those big agency people aren't going to be choosing. And then the same for the people sat next to me as well that are also in the same boat as me, perhaps there for the love of the game, don't necessarily have all the equipment because they've not been doing it as long, but it's occasionally looking at the players that aren't on the ball, for example, looking to see what they're doing, looking to see, those shots that people aren't necessarily focusing on. One of my favorite photos, one of them is Stina celebrating Lena's goal because everybody else, I believe, I didn't really see any other photos of Stina celebrating, but she was directly in front of me. And rather than trap the ball into the box, I decided to stay on her. So I've got a photo of her celebrating directly in front of me when I believe that everybody else will have got Lena's celebration as the goal scorer. It's just things like that. And also just trying to pick out, as I say, sort of moments and just crafting a photo in a bit of a different way, spending a bit of time on doing it, especially for social media, just sort of picking out what shows all the action of the game, like all the disappointment of the game, all of the joy of a game and frustrations with tackles and things like that. It's just picking and choosing and adapting to your own limitations.
How do you watch the game then? Because I find this at, when we'll do filming at the cricket, that's my sort of summer job. And sometimes our instruction will be you're on a camera this side and you're going to film the bowler. You're going to stick to the bowler. And then I sort of think, well, I want to see where the ball's gone or where it's been hit or how it's come off the pitch. But our instruction is if the bowler takes a wicket and then runs off celebrating, we need that shot. And you have to be sort of disciplined, stick to that. And I find that quite interesting. But how do you always watch a game back when you get home or in the week just to actually get that different view of it? Or, are you able to tell what the tactics are or if a certain player is having a good game? How much do you look up actually and watch a bit, or are you constantly behind the camera?
It's kind of a bit of both. I always say that, quite ironically, when we score more goals, I see very little of the actual game because obviously as soon as a goal's scored, my head's down, I'm editing, I'm transferring photos, getting them across to you. And if they do that in quite quick succession, so the North London Derby, very good example, 5 goals. For that game in particular, I still haven't actually watched that one back, but I couldn't really tell you that much about the game. I couldn't necessarily have told you what we were doing better than Tottenham, aside from the fact that we were scoring goals, because I was so focused on what I was doing. And when that's the case, you kind of then have to listen to what's going on around you. When your head's down editing, you have to be listening to what's going on around you to either hear the shutters next to you, people taking photos next to you, to know when you should be looking up and re-engaging a little bit, listening to the crowd as well. The crowd's quite good, obviously, to tell you when it's, a moment that the action's moving back towards you. Yeah, any snapshots that I feel that I see during a game, and I do try and watch games back. Not all of them, but when and where I can, just so I can learn more about the movements of some of the players and things, understand a bit more about, what they may choose to do or what we're unable to tell them to do for the next game, because you have to learn how players move and learn to anticipate where they're going to be and where they're going to be crossing the ball in versus keeping the ball at their feet and driving through and things. So yeah, kind of a bit of both. I often do say though that I can always tell, particularly at the beginning, towards the beginning of the season, the frustrations that people feel as fans in the stand when you're saying you're just passing around the box or you're constantly back passing or whatever it may be. You can sense that in when you're taking photos, as in I'll pick up the camera to be like, oh, great, they're coming towards us. And then you're presented with somebody's back constantly. So you have to put the camera back down again. So just little like signals like that, which are quite fun to see. And if I realize my head's been down editing too long, I realize that we're really not seeing too much of the ball because they haven't been coming towards me for me to take photos. So yeah, just bits and pieces like that, really.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes an injury or like a tactical timeout and stuff like that, can that be quite useful to buy you a bit of time?
Yeah, 100%, particularly if there have been goals that have been scored. It depends as to whether, particularly if it's chucking it down with rain, for example, I won't have my laptop out to be editing photos. I will be transferring directly to my phone. And that means that while I'm transferring, I can't be taking photos. So, and sometimes with so many phones around, the signal isn't great. It does mean that transferring photos can take 30, 40 seconds per photo on occasion, which is a long time during a game to be sat there. And obviously, with how fast paced it is. So yeah, those pauses in the game, those are always very useful for me, taking a moment just to download, perhaps edit or whatever.
Yeah, we've got a load of questions, and I'll sort of intersperse them with some of mine. There's some really good questions. I'll try and get through all of them. But Jamie Laurentius has asked a couple. I'm going to come to one of hers a bit later, but she's said, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from working under time pressure? And I think that is almost more for you than for me. Obviously I'm used to the live blog now, but you can sort of scale back that in terms of your coverage and simplify it if you like, and you do have that bit more time. But I guess for photography, it must be quite different, especially as you say, once all the goals are going in, and these factors as well, like weather and the signal, or if the ground's not the best, if your position's not the best. What has there been one game maybe where you thought, actually that was difficult, I need to maybe adapt how I do things next time?
I think every game there's something that I can adapt and learn from it in terms of how I do things. But the Bayern game just before Christmas was possibly the worst conditions that I've shot in. It absolutely chucking it down for the whole game, and it gets to a point where you don't have anything dry to. I wear glasses, so I've got the potential of having water on my glasses, water on my on the screen on my camera, water on potentially the lens, and I can't tell whether there's water on the lens or not because there's just so much water everywhere. At Meadow Park it can get quite tricky because obviously you are just very open to the elements there, so it is a case of just doing what you can. In terms of what I've learned, I'd say it does boil down to just knowing that you can only do so much. You can only do what you can do as a photographer. I will do my utmost to get everything to you as quickly as possible in the moment that it happens, or shortly after. But just sometimes it's just not possible. I said, the transferring things over may take longer than you want it to. All of the action may be up in the attacking end where I'm normally sat. So it's you have to make that judgment call of, do I continue editing and perhaps miss some of the action? Do I continue to shoot the action and just delay a little bit on the photos that I send through? It's always this trade-offs really that you kind of have to make. But it's something that it doesn't bother me as much now as it did at the beginning of the season. At the beginning of the season, I put a lot of pressure on myself to do everything, which is just not feasible. I've already talked about the limitations of equipment and things like that. I'm not going to be able to get every shot. I'm not going to be able to get it across to you like 2 minutes after the goals happen necessarily. The big agencies don't necessarily do that in the same way either. They have like a bigger team that helps them. So yeah, recognizing your own limitations and doing what you can, but not letting that get you down if you're not doing it as fast as you see other people doing it and things like that.
Yeah, I think you have to grow to enjoy that pressure. Enjoy that of, if I'm at a game and I have to do a match report on the whistle and a goal goes in the 89th minute, I always make myself laugh because I'm like, oh, typical. It's happened to me. And then I just get on with it because you can't, at the end of the day, you can't control a football match. You can't control your conditions. Sometimes, Turin or Biella, for an example, it's the worst press box I've ever sat in. It was freezing cold. We were absolutely shattered. And on that game, I thought, I'm not going to be the best journalist ever, but I'm going to get on with it and I'm going to, produce that coverage. And I think people rightly have high expectations of the content that we put out, which is probably pressure that we've put on ourselves because we've proven that we are capable of putting some great stuff out. But a lot of the time, actually, people don't get that behind the scenes look into actually, they might go, oh, that photo is a bit blurry, but they've got no idea if it's chucking it down with rain or if you've just had a problem transferring something. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
there's a lot of factors at play, I'd say, for everyone involved in that sort of sports media landscape, whatever role you're in.
yeah, 100%. I think I always make that split between I get the photos across that I can during the game, small variety, any goals. Occasionally they might be, normally if I'm having to transfer to my phone, that's when they may be slightly blurred just because I can't see them big enough, big enough to check the resolution. But then there's that split between during the game, getting stuff out for that instant reaction, and then after the game where I can take a bit more time doing it and, sort of making sure that the photos are up to scratch in that sense. So yeah, it's good knowing that I've got that split and a chance to put out some good shots afterwards as well.
Well, Kirsten Robertson has asked, how do you protect your camera and yourself when the weather takes a turn? Is there any specific tips that sort of the go-to?
Well, camera wise, it varies between having a plastic cover over it, which is just a faff because it's very difficult to get to the controls when you've got that over it. When I'm sat, not wandering around during warm up and things to take photos, when I'm sat pitch side, I normally just literally have a towel over the top of my camera. It just makes it easier. One of those microfiber ones that just absorbs the water. As I said, the Bayern game, it didn't. That was the one game where it didn't help too much. But on that, you just have to go with it and hope the camera's okay. But otherwise, I'd say I've recently discovered what are they? The inserts, for shoes that heat up, the reheatable inserts. Those are a lifesaver, particularly the coldest game that I've shot was in Oslo, where it was -9, -10 degrees. That one I just had hand warmers in my pockets and I edited as much as I could, but that was a game where I really couldn't afford to leave my hands outside of my pockets for very long. So yeah, just thick coats, lots of layers, and towel is the main thing. Nothing too technical, unfortunately.
Well, I was out playing cricket in the park this afternoon, so we're definitely moving away, hopefully, from the bleak winter months and towards, well, certainly I think if your last away trip in Oslo was cold, your next one in Madrid hopefully is going to be a
I'm
lot nicer.
hoping that will
Yeah.
be quite nice.
Nice evening kickoff. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. Before we get into the questions, what I've never asked you is actually the first time you've picked up a camera and I guess your photography journey as a whole. I interviewed you and Natalie, must have been a couple of years ago now, certainly early last season, about your sort of women's football journey, foray into Arsenal women, which was obviously inspired by the Euros, and then taking your camera into the crowd. But what started things off for you in terms of photography, and when was that moment when you thought, actually, I love being in the stands, but I'd like to give this a go pitch side as well?
Photography, that's just been a constant throughout my life, really. My dad's dad, my granddad, he owned a photography shop, so it's something that my dad loved, and therefore imparted that wisdom onto me. So yeah, growing up, I've pretty well always had different versions of cameras in my hand. I think when I moved to London a fair few years ago, that was when I started. It's always mainly been more static objects and architecture that I've enjoyed taking photos of. So sports is quite the departure from that. But yeah, architecture and street photography, I've just always loved that. And whenever I leave the flat, as I said, particularly when I lived in London, just having a camera was always a must because you never know what there is to capture. Yeah, and then from that, it was moving into the stands again. It was just natural to have my camera with me from that perspective. It's just always been with me. But I think the moment that I decided that this was what I wanted to do more with it was probably, I think it was probably the Wolfsburg game, the semi-final for the Champions League. I think that was a big game for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But just some of the photos I took during that game, the light was perfect. Obviously, there were so many ups and downs. There was just so much to capture. I was lucky enough to be sat behind the bench, so I could see the reactions of some of our players who were injured, like Leah Williamson, Kim Little. They were both on the bench, and just seeing them go through what we were going through as fans and capturing some of those moments. Obviously, not taking too many of that, mainly focusing on the pitch, but that game just made me realize that I wanted to do more with it. And it then took me a solid year of trying to build out a bit of a portfolio, really. And some people managed to do things a bit faster. I was a bit slow getting into finding the right opportunities to be able to shoot pitch side. But yeah, it was that was the moment, I think, where I thought, I just want to do this. I want to be able to capture these moments as well as, watch the games, but there's just something so special. I think these things are so fleeting and you can never really recapture them in quite the same way. But photography is one of those ways that you can immediately be taken back to a place. So yeah, that was the moment for me.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think the Arsenal fans have really got behind it because obviously they get these, it's sometimes behind the scenes look, and there's so many tiny things that you could spot in some of these pictures. But also what I loved from last weekend was the fan walk and really capturing that, and actually thinking where a lot of photographers would go into the ground and just sit pitchside and wait for the game. You were out and about on the streets knowing this is going to happen, and that's where that connection with the fans is really important as well. And I guess it can go both ways. You can benefit from that as well.
Yeah, no, I do love taking photos of the fans. I mean, as a fan being in the stand, that was something that you obviously capture in a different way to when you're pitch side. You can tell very much when photos have been taken and you're in amongst the action versus looking into the crowd from the outside. So I haven't really been outside and taking photos when shooting at the Emirates. I haven't really been outside to take photos of fans in the same way, just with getting to grips with the whole process of what goes on behind the scene, getting ready for the Emirates, making sure that you arrive early so you have your spot and things like that there. So it was really brilliant to take that time and go and shoot some shots at the fans, and particularly the fan walks and things. I mean, it's something that's so special to what we what we do for Arsenal, what the fans do for Arsenal, the way that the supporters club, the red and white, they organize these marches. And it's just, yeah, it is something that's very special and particular to Arsenal. So being able to capture that is obviously quite important to the whole experience. And yeah, it's nice to do.
Yeah, let's get into some questions then. And what I will do for those watching on YouTube is pop some of these pictures that you talk about on the screen as well, so people can see some of them. If you're on Spotify, as we say, make sure to head over to at Boodle Pim on any social media platform. I think you're across everything, and then obviously the Gooner too. But at Han Solo 1918 says, "What's your favourite photo you have taken?" I guess Arsenal women only. Do you want to say this season to narrow it down a tiny bit?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I saw this question and I was trying to think through. I think that one of the ones that does stick in my head is that the Beth goal celebration where she pretty well roared like down the lens looking straight at me. Obviously a lot of the other, we talked earlier about that competitiveness, a lot of the other photographers next to me will have all got a very similar shot, but I think that moments like that where you're so close to the action, it's very different to what you can experience in the stands. And I think that particular photo, it did capture that sense of being so close to the action. It is very fractionally out of focus, which really aggravates me. So maybe it shouldn't be one of my favorite photos, but yeah, I do think that one, it probably encapsulates just so much passion in the moment of scoring a goal. I mean, that's what football's all about. It's the goals or winning games. Well, yeah, so I think that picture in particular did encapsulate a lot of that. But after every game, I have a new favourite photo. I'm not going to lie, so difficult to pinpoint one.
Was she looking down your camera? How certain can you be of that?
I mean, it looked very, very close. I
I
think
think it is.
I mean, I think that it was just luck really, and how she obviously towed the ball into the goal and then just turned round while standing up and everything. So she did a proper sweep. I think she was eye level. I think that was what made it so special. She was properly eye level with all of us photographers. So, and it's partly a luck of the draw in terms of how many frames you take, whether the frame captures exactly the moment that her eyes kind of are looking down the lens and things. So it's just serendipitous really that everything kind of, aside from the slight fuzziness of the photo, everything else kind of came together for that particular shot. So yeah, there are a few others that's kind of similar. Those goal shots they're all great moments to capture when it actually happens on your side of the goal, which is a bit of a coin toss as to whether that happens or not. So yeah.
Yeah, and obviously being in the right place is important. A lot of the games, certainly when Arsenal play a team lower down the WSL, there's always very few photographers behind the Arsenal goalkeeper, and they're all up the other end. And obviously that choice is a crucial one, really. And Adam Salter asked, do you stay in one position during a game, or do you move as the action moves on the pitch? Am I right in thinking once you're in one position, certainly for one half, you can't move, can you?
Normally they're relatively strict on that front. Normally I'd say it's only like the club photographers that have that bit more freedom to move around. It does depend slightly. So for example, Leicester away at King Power Stadium, I think it was this past season, before Christmas. That one, because there was a good crowd, but it was only half the stand that had fans in it, which meant that we had the freedom of not just sitting behind either end of the goal, but we could walk up and down the sideline opposite the fans, so obviously we weren't in view of the camera, we weren't obstructing the fans' views either. So I took the opportunity during that game to actually move around a bit more and move up and down with the action and follow it a bit more. But no, that's a rarity, to be honest. Normally you can change at half time, but that's it. And yeah, so normally I will choose to sit behind the attacking end. Just mainly due to my equipment, I don't have a big zoom. So if I'm sat at the at the wrong end, in that sense, if the goal happened and if there's only one goal, for example, during a game and it happens up the other end, I won't be able to capture it. So that's just a missed opportunity. If I had a bigger zoom, then I might make the decision to sit at just one end, so then you can get the defensive players as well as the attacking players. And then the other thing, actually, in terms of the moving around, that may or may not be interesting to people, but obviously what you do is normally you don't, when you change ends, you don't sit diagonally, because you're just going to get exactly the same players each time. You normally aim to sit opposite so you can get both sides of the action. Yeah, normally just change at half time. And anybody at the games, you'll normally see like a hurried clump of photographers trying to hustle from one end to the other at half time, just to make sure that you can get the spot that you want. So yeah.
Yes, like when a gig opens up and everyone flies down to the front. Yeah, I do often notice that. So a few questions left for Suzy. Thank you all for sending them in. One from Lucy at I'm Not Cynthia said, "How annoying is it when we all shout hello?" I'm guessing she's meaning from the stands at the Emirates or Meadow Park, trying to get your attention and get you to take a picture.
To be fair, the shoutings of hello, I really don't mind. That's quite nice. It's when they all start chanting that I'm on the pitch and I'm sat next to an Arsenal representative and I'm like, I'm not, and I'm not planning on it. No, it's nice actually, because I don't get the chance to be in the stands that often. So it is quite nice when I get that like little bit of interaction. I'm not asking to have it every single game, but it makes you feel like a little bit part of the crowd, which is quite nice actually.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. Yeah. It's definitely picked up this season. Like I've just seen someone like make a lot of Wooden Moy TikTok edit and like my tweets on there, and it's like it still feels really weird. Like I sort of jump every time I see that. It's like I don't want people, it just seems really weird seeing people use my stuff on that. And I remember after Juventus away, I think I wrote this in an article, but I left to get the train back. I don't think I caught you after it, and I asked the steward to open the gate, and he said, "Well, this is where the players leave as well." And I thought, oh, okay, but can you open it? And he opened it for me, and there was like all the Arsenal fans on both sides expecting the players, and everyone's face has just dropped, which you get all the time because a lot of the time we share like the entrances and exits with the players, and you've got the fans waiting. And then a few of them struck up a bit of a chant for me, which was really nice. And then obviously headed off to the train station. But yeah, it's lovely to get the interaction, and social media is often really good for that as well. And I'm sure you get more positive bits than I do because my player ratings will get slated. But yeah, I can't even imagine you've had a negative comment for your photos. They just seem to go down a treat.
Yeah, I don't think I've. Yeah, I can't think of any particularly negative ones, which is nice to be fair. But yeah, no, normally only positivity when it comes to photos being shared, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, and rightly so. A couple really interesting questions to finish on from Jamie Laurentius again. How do you view this women's game as a stepping stone for many creatives? And she said, I can answer this too. It's really interesting for me because I get a lot of people who ask, oh, I presume you're doing Arsenal women so you can do the men. And people see that as the pathway, is that I'm only here because I want to do the men further on in the future. When that's never how I've seen it. It's like actually I wouldn't necessarily have done this for Arsenal's academy, thinking, oh, I could do the men as a step up. It's like I just wanted to do the women's team. I wanted to carve out a niche for the Gooner, and I love the people I've met and the culture of the women's game. And I do feel more at home probably in a press box for a women's game than a lot of the men's ones I do because I'm more used to that environment. I think people can often be a touch more friendly. It's a younger press pack as well, which I quite like, probably a more diverse press pack as well. When I did Mikel Arteta's press conference in January, there wasn't a single woman in the room, and I sort of pointed that out to Leif, and it was like we've still got a long way to go. So I really love working in the women's game. Of course, I love working in the men's as well, and I don't see it as a stepping stone. I think I'm lucky enough to do a lot of different things that are all, a lot of people think, oh, that'd be good on your CV. But actually, for me, it's like, well, it's good now. I'm not doing it for my CV. I'm doing it because it's what I want to do and it's what I enjoy. And I guess that's the same for you. But for the women's game in particular, it is a lot of people's way into media and a way into what they want to do. So I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think that the thing is, as I said before, like this is a topic that so many people are passionate about and have a lot of opinions about. So it's like it's a really good space to be creative in. Like it gives a lot of different opportunities, and we represent sort of the written media and the photography side as well. But there are just so many different ways that you can get involved, and with social media as well, it's very easy to have that platform and use that platform to convey ideas and things. And as you say, like be a content creator in this space. I think that it's at the point where it's becoming more saturated. Not saturated, it's not quite there yet, but it's definitely becoming a lot more popular, and people have recognized the fact that this has been a bit of a space which has been underdeveloped or not as well served as it should have been in the past. So since Euros, obviously there has been that growth of interest in it. And so there are more people that are recognizing that there are opportunities here, which is fantastic if they can take hold of those and run with it. But yeah, for me, I mean, I love women's football, and I obviously, Arsenal's my team, so shooting them week in, week out is fantastic. But I do, as and when I can, shoot other teams as well, because I do love just the sport in general, branching out into basketball and things like that as well for the sports photography umbrella too. It's so I suppose in that sense, it's given me the opportunity to expand into these other areas and see different sports that I hadn't necessarily anticipated seeing. And now that I've been to shoot a few of those basketball games, I'm finding that, well, actually, I love that as well. So it's funny how things kind of develop off the back of wanting to be creative in this. As we've said, I just started taking a few photos in the stands with not a great camera, just making of it what I could. And now I'm pitchside at nearly every game. I've upgraded my equipment. It's not as good as I'd like it to be, but it's better than it was when I was in the stands. So I'm making these small kind of incremental steps forward in terms of what I can produce and growing in the role and learning things at every game. So yeah, it is a fantastic space for that. For me, I'm not looking to move into the men's game either, but I think the women's game is going to be such a big thing going forwards. I mean, obviously we can see how much it's grown just over the past couple of years, and it's not going to stop. So these opportunities are only there are going to be more of them, and it's going to be harder to get into them. But yeah, it's an amazing space to be creative and have that freedom.
I think part of why I love it is because I started out and still continue in non-league football, and I think there's a lot of similarities between the two in how they've perhaps found more popularity in recent years, where people get more disillusioned with sort of the top flight of the men's game, and how both are always sort of battling, but are also quite comfortable in their own spaces, that they don't want to be, they don't want to follow some of the flaws of the Premier League, for example. They want to be in their own space. They want to build their own communities, and I think it's a great place for young aspiring journalists to start in. I think you're more likely as well to get better interviewees, perhaps, in terms of if your first game is at a men's game and you ask a bad question, it's not going to go down well for you. Whereas if it's at a women's game, chances are a manager, a player might be a bit more forgiving, a bit more friendly. And I think we've all experienced that. But there is also that alternative argument, and I don't want to criticize any particular websites here, but I'm seeing new women's football blogs pop up every week. And I'm seeing them, gain accreditation within a couple of weeks. And there's some great people doing this. But also, are we saturating the market? If everyone's going to come up with women's football blogs, they're all going to produce similar coverage. How are we going to get to the point where if everyone can do this and if everyone's going to get accreditation, and it's the same on the photography side, we're just going to get lost because nobody's going to actually want to read a match report. If they're going to go, I've got 10 blogs to choose between that are all offering quite similar content, how do you stand out? And we're lucky with the Gooner that we've got that brand, we've got this collection of writers. But I do worry if we make it too easy to get into the women's games. And by all means, there are press boxes we go to where there's barely anybody there. Everton away in a couple of weeks, there's not going to be many people there. Do a women's championship game, not going to be many people there. But then you do Chelsea, Arsenal, the press box is rammed. So how do you, and I guess this is more for press officers, isn't it, up and down the country and at WSL clubs, but how do you view the current situation at the moment? And there have been some perhaps videos of interactions between these content creators, if you like, and players. There was at one with Sabrina D'Angelo, and I think we're at quite an interesting position now for this media coverage of the women's game, because maybe the top outlets still aren't as dedicated as they could be, and that's allowed this growth of some of these sort of startup platforms. But how many is too many? It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it is a bit of a conundrum, really, because everybody has to start somewhere. There's absolutely nothing wrong with kind of coming into the game and wanting to do something and like getting these opportunities. Like, you have to go for what you can go for. And if you get these opportunities, you should 100% take it and run with it. And yeah, I do think at some point there will be, I couldn't say when, but I do think at some point a bit more of a clear delineation, or getting accreditation will probably have a bit more structure to it, which at the minute it kind of depends on who you want to shoot for, or which games you're applying for, in terms of what's required. And so I think that will become a lot more stringent to make sure that the people applying do have the experience, or sort of demonstrating that they do have a portfolio, that they are shooting for a media outlet that does have some traction and authority, for example. Perhaps it will take a very long time to get to the state that it is in the men's game, where you have to go via like a fully external official body and so on. But yeah, I think we are getting to the point where there needs to be some form of, I suppose regulation is kind of a strong word, but a little bit more of a considered choice in terms of who covers games. But at the same time, I do think that having so much option now is great, because it is what's been lacking. So it's kind of finding that balance between making sure that people are serious about it, and taking it seriously, and not stunting the growth of what is happening, because it is good having options at the same time, because it's not had those options in the past. it's a fine line to walk, and I'm glad that I'm not the one that's going to be making the decisions on how to do it. But yeah, I think that in the coming years there will probably be some changes. So I think that we're probably quite lucky in as much as we're doing it now, at the point where it isn't too big and too difficult to get into.
Mm. Yeah, and there's some great stuff out there, but I think realistically, like my housemate could start a blog and make it well informed about women's football, and they would be able to get into some games, at the top level. And I think, is that how it should be? For so many people, their first experience of a press box is that they're shadowing someone or they're on work experience, and then you're told all of these things, aren't you? You're told actually you can't celebrate goals, you need to do this, this, and this. We can't necessarily just have this influx of people coming in, because you are going to see moments like that interaction where actually the borders, the boundaries between fan and journalist, when you're up close to these players, this is where everyone, I feel like, in this game has a mentor. And that's, for me, it's obviously been Leif, but you sort of learn, it's passed down to you a little
Yeah,
bit sometimes. I think it's really interesting to see, because there's so many people. I think you look at Daisy from Beyond the Pitch, but and how they've managed to differentiate their content, make it something a bit different. And I think there is that opportunity to do it, and there is that viewership as well. I think the women's football fans are very well informed. They like consuming this content. They like delving further into the stories away from the pitch as well. And I think there's a real willingness to catch up on the history of the women's game as well. There's been a lot of debate about perhaps new fans coming in and how they're engaging with everything. But you look at some of the work that's been done by the likes of Adam Salter to go back and find some of this archive history and people learning about the club. They're a well-educated bunch, aren't they? The Arsenal fans and women's football fans in general. And I think the type of content we make is often so catered towards the fans.
yeah, no, 100%. And as you say, like, these football fans, a lot of them are very well informed and they do read everything. So yeah, finding that niche is quite tricky, and finding the way of continuing to engage them the same. But yeah, sort of having that. Yeah, it is all about being creative, but finding the niche and not just regurgitating what you see online. And obviously, the thing is as well, like journalism, it isn't just there is a difference between. I have a blog, I write blogs as well. In this space, I write from the perspective of a fan, as being a fan, because I'm not a journalist, and there are there are kind of rules that you have to follow as a journalist, not just in terms of the behavior, as you're saying, but sort of about ensuring that you're very credible in what it is that you're saying, ensuring that you can check your sources and so on as well. So there is that line between journalism and having a blog, which there's obviously no issue with that, as long as they are kind of clearly defined in that sense. And the same for photography. We have to make sure that we behave professionally pitchside. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're putting out the best quality photos, and so on. Make sure that you build up your experience, your knowledge, and so on. So yeah, it's but we'll see how it develops. I guess it is such an interesting space, and creatively there is just so much going on, which is
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and I'd much rather see a full press box than an empty one. There's one club that I won't name, but they are so strict with their accreditation policies, and there are reasons as to that I'm aware to, that probably aren't linked to the journalists themselves, but more stuff to do with the club. But it's so disappointing, when I go there and just look around and they have all these empty press box seats, and I know there have been people who want to learn and ply their trade and get some experience. And yeah, the women's game is a great place to do it in, and we've been so lucky as well at the Gooner to see some of the people we've had come through. Obviously, Daisy and Izzy writing for us and being able to take them to press boxes, and Claudia as well, has been really nice for me actually to sort of help people take their first steps into it. So we're very very lucky to be in the position we are. Maybe you'll get someone shadowing you one day as well, and you can show
I'm
them
still
the
the
ropes.
shadowy, I think, but yeah.
One final question then, from Ruse at RuseCH91 says, "Hi Suzy, I love your work, but just wanted to say that again. Any tips for starting match day photographers, lens choice, technical settings?" So now you can get nerdy with it. This will go a little bit over my head, but for many people it will resonate, I hope.
For getting started, well, I think that firstly, if it's for being pitch side, just find different opportunities like local games that you can attend and just shoot pitch side. Ask them if you can do so, or just do it from the stands. Get used to using a camera and just pushing the limits of what it is that you can do with it. I think that you don't have to, it doesn't have to cost the earth to get a starter kit to shoot pitch side. It can do, but it doesn't have to. I always say that I think everybody starts out with a 70 to 200 mil lens. That's sort of the focal length, the sort of the zoom that is most adaptable when you're starting. And if you can afford it, an f2.8, so that's to do with the aperture, so that makes sure that the background's blurry, so it makes sure that your subject is going to be as it's going to draw the eye to your subject as much as possible, because you get that bit of differentiation between the player that you're shooting and then the background as well. I shoot with an f4, which means that the background is not as blurry as I'd like to be, for example, and that's a regret of mine. So if you can get a 2.8, then that's always a good thing. But then, otherwise it's kind of, in terms of what you use on the day, I sometimes will keep it in shutter priority, which means that I want it to be at this speed. I don't want it to dip any lower if the light's fading or whatever it may be. I'll occasionally keep it on that just to make sure that the speed of the shutter works as intended. At night, I'll shoot in RAW instead of just shooting with JPEGs. The RAW files, they make sure they kind of capture a lot more data, so you can edit it a lot more. So if it's a particularly dark, for example, in some underexposed in some of your photos, you can make sure that you make it a lot brighter without losing any of the detail in the photo itself. If you shoot in RAW, they're much bigger files, so you have to make sure that you have enough memory on your SD cards or whatever it is that you're saving it onto, for example. But it's all about just learning as you go. I've pretty well always used kind of manual settings and things, but going from shooting architecture to shooting sports is obviously very, very different. And, adapting to different lighting on the day, making sure that you have the right, white balance set for the conditions that you're shooting in. Making sure that you don't have it on too slow a shutter speed, so things are blurry, making it blurry if you want it to, and really slowing down the shutter speed so you can get some cool arty shots. It's can be all about experimentation, but that's where it goes back to go down to your local team and shoot those games, so you can really get used to the movement, the speed and things, so that then once you gain a bit of a portfolio, you have things to prove that you're interested, you're serious, you're taking the time to learn your trade. Then you can apply for the women's championship games, the WSL games as well, and start to apply what you've learned in a bit more of a professional capacity in that sense.
Yeah, I guess like when you look at some of the non-league games and the lower tier women's games, you can basically be pitch side whilst being in the crowd, and those stewards will tell you can't have your camera there, so just go down and try it out essentially. And it's that sort of thing where it's not like a radio or written stuff. It's actually the only person who needs to see those photos at first is you and whoever you want for some feedback, and you do have that creativity. Look, I've kept you far too long, but one question, final one from me, as a bit of a stadium nerd. If you had to, I'd love to know how you'd sort of design your perfect scenario for match photography. So when are we doing it? What season? What's the weather going to be like? What time of day do you want? And then I want kit colours, right? And I want a stadium. And you don't have to be your Arsenal bias here, but I want your sort of perfect scenario for taking pictures at a football game.
Okay. I'm not going to lie that actually recently the Arsenal London City Lionesses, those colours were really nice to edit.
Yeah.
It just leads into my editing style for that. So that is pretty good. Green kit, absolutely awful, because you can edit for the pitch and the colour of the pitch, but as soon as they have green in their kit and you want to try and keep that true to life, it just makes it a bit more difficult. So yeah, that the red of Arsenal and then the blues and things like that, that's always a good bit of contrast. In terms of time of day, I actually quite like sun shooting in the sun, as long as it's side on. If you're shooting directly into the sun, that's not a good thing. But if you have if the light is coming side on from the sidelines, then that can actually create quite a bit of atmosphere. Sometimes it makes it tricky because obviously if they're running through shadow, it can make it quite tricky, but kind of like a soft, warm kind of sun can be really fun to play with when you're editing, and the contrast between the shadows and the light, it can make it just give it a bit of extra depth to your photos. Again, the Wolfsburg game, for example, that was just beautiful sunshine for the majority. And so it just made it really visually different, I guess. And go on, you can't really beat Emirates. The lighting there is perfect. I'm starting to know the people that work there and things, which makes it quite nice to always go back to. I know where the media room is. I know the timings. I know how to get around. So, yeah, it's nice being home at the Emirates. Always just a lovely experience. But sunny at the Emirates or under the lights, Champions League under the lights, that's incredibly special whenever that happens too. So, yeah, that would be my scenario there. One of those two.
Yeah, I really like that London City kit. Really, really like it. And obviously, we've got one more Champions League midweek game, and then the semi-finals home and away are on Saturday or Sundays, and then obviously the final if we go all the way in Lisbon. Suzy, brilliant to talk. Found this really interesting. I'm sure our listeners have as well. Thank you all for sending in your questions. And I guess just if anyone's not familiar with your work already, where's the best place to find it all?
I mean, either obviously in the Gooner, most of the photos in the fanzine will be from me, or just at Boodle Pim. If you have a search for that across social media, should be able to find me.
And we'll both be there on Sunday. Leif is with me in the press box. Daisy and Leif will be selling the Gooner. If you're heading into the North Bank, Daisy will be there. If you're going through the normal Boreham Wood car park into that sort of south stand, if you're going in through that entrance, then Leif's going to be there as well. And if you see me in the ground, I'll have a bag full of copies as well. So if you haven't got your first ever Gooner fanzine dedicated to Arsenal women, as Suzy said, packed full of her photography, it will be available on sale again on Sunday. Look forward to it, Suzy. See you there.
Yeah, me too. I'll have to pick up my copy there. I missed out because we sold out last time. So look forward to picking it up there.